The silence that shames the loud, the weapon no one sees coming. There is a kind of silence that does not submit. It dominates, not the silence of fear or uncertainty, but the stillness of someone who has already won. In a world addicted to noise, opinions and ego battles, silence has become a forgotten power. And yet it is this exact power that turns the tide of every situation. When you stay silent, you create tension. You allow the other person to reveal their strategy, expose their weaknesses, and overextend themselves. Freud taught that silence often disturbs the unconscious more than words, forcing hidden anxieties and insecurities to surface. When you don't react, you trigger projection. People start imagining your thoughts, fearing your judgments, and questioning their own stance. Silence becomes a mirror so clean that others cannot look into it without confronting themselves. Jung believed the shadow, what people hide, becomes most visible when they are forced to fill the silence themselves. In that gap, you control the frame. Jesus, when brought before Pilate, chose silence. He didn't defend himself. His lack of words made even the ruler uneasy. That moment in history teaches a brutal lesson. When you know your truth, you don't owe anyone an explanation. Every word is a negotiation, a risk, a leak of energy. When you stay quiet, you remain whole. Sun Tzu said, "When you are strong, appear weak. When you are near, appear far." Silence embodies this tactic. It makes you unpredictable, unreadable, and unshakable. While others reveal their emotional temperature, you stay the mystery. And mystery always holds more power than explanation. In daily life, the power of silence can be used in arguments, confrontations, interviews, negotiations, and even in relationships. Let your presence speak louder than your voice. When someone insults you and you simply look at them calm, unbothered, it shakes them. Why? Because you've taken away their script. They expected a reaction. They wanted control. Your silence destroys their rhythm. That's the move. In a fight, the one who loses control first is already defeated. Silence delays your fall, buys you time, and forces the other to stumble first. This is how kings win wars without lifting a sword. Proverbs 17:28 says, "Even a fool is considered wise when he keeps silent." You don't need to prove intelligence, your restraint proves it for you. In a society where everyone is performing, the man who doesn't perform becomes the most respected. His silence signals confidence, preparation, and depth. There's a reason why the lion doesn't need to roar. His presence already tells the jungle who he is. The key is to pair your silence with presence. Don't shrink, expand in stillness. Let your body speak through posture, your eyes through focus, your energy through calm. This kind of presence wins negotiations before they begin. It's not about saying nothing. It's about knowing when saying nothing says everything. So next time you feel pressure to speak, defend, argue, or explain, pause. Let the silence speak for you. If you master that pause, you'll hold the power in rooms you haven't even entered yet. Freud reveals what your body says when your mouth stays shut. When you choose silence, your body becomes the loudest voice in the room, and most people don't even realize they're already speaking without a single word. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, believed that repressed thoughts and feelings find their way out through unconscious behaviors. Posture, facial expressions, micro-movements, these are not accidents. They are revelations. The body leaks truth. And when you master stillness with awareness, you begin to speak a language far more powerful than noise. In every negotiation, argument, or moment of tension, your body becomes either your weakness or your weapon. Crossed arms scream defensiveness. A jittery foot reveals insecurity. Constant blinking uncovers discomfort. But stillness, controlled, intentional, unwavering, signals dominance. People trust what they see more than what they hear. You can say, "I'm fine," 1,000 times. But if your shoulders slump and your eyes avoid contact, the truth leaks out. Silence becomes lethal when your body is aligned with confidence. Freud argued that the unconscious always finds a way to express itself. So while your words may lie, your presence doesn't. That's why the truly powerful speak less. They don't need to. Their calm demeanor, straight spine, direct gaze, and slow movements already send the message, I am not threatened, I'm in control. Most people react, but the silent observer responds only when necessary. That difference is what separates the manipulated from the master. In a psychological battle, the one who can remain still the longest wins, because stillness forces the other to project, to speak, to act, while you gather data. This is not passivity. This is strategic delay. It's chess, not checkers. When someone attacks you verbally and you remain calm, your silence echoes louder than their shout. They begin to question themselves. They start filling the void with more words, trying to force a reaction. But every unnecessary word they speak gives you more power. Freud would call this a transfer of psychic energy. They spend theirs, you conserve yours. And in any real game of power, energy management is everything. Jung later built on this idea, saying that a man unaware of his body's signals is ruled by his unconscious. But the man who controls his silence and his presence is unshakable. The silent man is not empty. He is full of tension, power, and direction. He speaks through posture, not panic, through breath, not blurts. This is not about pretending to be a statue. It's about aligning your internal state with your external stillness. When you feel fear, your body shows it. But when you convert fear into focus, your silence becomes intimidating. Your opponent senses it but can't explain it. That's when you've won without touching a thing. So train yourself in the art of still communication. Speak with your gaze, command through presence. Practice silence in conflict, not as submission but as strategy. And remember, when you choose not to speak, you give space for others to expose themselves. You force the world to reveal its cards, while you keep yours close to the chest. That is the advantage of the silent warrior. He wins not with noise but with knowledge. And in the end, the most powerful truths are not shouted, they are embodied. The ancient secret of Proverbs, the fool speaks, the wise man conquers in. The pages of Proverbs, one of the most timeless books of wisdom ever written, lies a hidden principle of silent victory that few truly master. Even a fool is thought wise if he keeps silent, says Proverbs 17:28. This is not poetic metaphor, it is brutal strategy, because the greatest form of dominance does not come from the sharpness of your tongue, but from your ability to restrain it. In every social conflict, whether it's business, relationships, or leadership, the person who speaks first often gives away the game. Why? Because speaking is revealing. And once you reveal, you've surrendered a piece of your power. When you stay silent, you become unreadable, and the unreadable man becomes unforgettable. Solomon, the wisest king who ever lived, understood this. Silence is not weakness, it is control. A fool speaks to validate himself. He needs to be heard because he fears being ignored. But the wise speak only when speaking is necessary. They conserve their words the way a warrior conserves arrows. Each one must hit the target. Silence forces the enemy to doubt. In a negotiation, if you respond too quickly, you show desperation. But if you wait just long enough, their certainty begins to crack. They question your silence. They begin to fill the void with their own assumptions, and in doing so, they often make fatal mistakes. In an argument, the fool shouts to feel powerful. The wise man listens, absorbs, then strikes with surgical precision, if he strikes at all. Many battles are won simply by refusing to fight. Because when a wise man withholds his reaction, the fool exhausts himself. Proverbs also says, when words are many, transgression is not lacking. The more you speak, the more likely you are to sin, not only morally but strategically. You reveal too much. You say what should have remained hidden. You hand the enemy your blueprint, but the silent man remains covered in mystery, and mystery is magnetic. It attracts curiosity, fear, and sometimes even respect. Silence lets others dig their own holes while you observe. It's the art of passive domination. Jesus embodied this during his trial. When accused, he said nothing. When mocked, he remained still. That silence was thunder to the ears of his accusers. Why? Because nothing is louder than a man who chooses not to defend himself. It sends a message. I don't need to lower myself to your level. I know who I am. That's the essence of power. Certainty without explanation. Every wise figure in history mastered this. Sun Tzu instructed generals to be formless like water. Formless people don't speak unless their words are aligned with their objective. Even in modern psychology, silence is used as a tool. Therapists allow patients to sit in their own silence until the truth emerges. Why? Because humans hate unresolved space. They fill it, often with confessions, projections, or vulnerabilities. You can use this same power. In a meeting, stay silent and observe. In a fight, wait and breathe. In negotiation, let the other side show their hand first. You are not obligated to react. You are only required to respond intentionally. This discipline of silence is not about suppressing your voice forever. It's about knowing when speaking helps and when it hurts. It's about strategic speech, controlled conversation, measured dialogue. Because when you finally do speak, your words carry the weight of silence behind them, and that weight is what gives them impact. In a noisy world, the quiet man stands out. While others scream, he whispers, and everyone leans in. While others argue, he pauses, and everyone waits. You don't need to be loud to be respected. You need to be disciplined. You need to know the value of silence and wield it like a sword. Speak less, see more, win silently. That's not just biblical wisdom, it's battlefield truth. Let the fools talk, let the world shout. You're here to win, quietly. Jesus before Pilate, the power of the answer that never came. There is a moment in history that echoes with divine silence, a moment that shook an empire, not because of thunderous words, but because of a man who chose not to speak. When Jesus stood before Pilate, accused, mocked, and facing death, he did something most men cannot even imagine. He said nothing, not out of fear, not out of defeat, but out of an untouchable authority that needed no defense. That silence has echoed through centuries, challenging every idea we have about power, justice, and control. Imagine it. The crowd is shouting. The rulers are demanding. The Roman governor is questioning, and the Son of God remains still, silent, and calm. Why? Because true power does not panic. It does not explain itself to those who do not seek truth. Jesus' silence before Pilate wasn't weakness. It was divine clarity. It was the ultimate demonstration that when you know your identity, you don't beg others to understand it. You walk in it. In today's world, where everyone fights to be heard, where silence is mistaken for surrender, Jesus teaches us that sometimes the greatest act of strength is restraint. His refusal to speak was not avoidance. It was confrontation of a higher level. It told Pilate, "You have no power over me except what was given." That silence didn't just win a moment, it revealed a kingdom. And you can wield that same kingdom power in your own life. When you're attacked, don't react. When you're misunderstood, don't chase approval. When lies are spoken, don't scramble to clean them up. Let silence do what noise never could. Reveal truth without contamination. Every time you speak in defense of yourself out of fear, you lose a layer of influence. Every word said in panic dilutes your presence. But when you stand firm, unmoved, when you look into the eyes of accusation and hold your ground without a single word, you mirror the sun. You operate on a frequency that earthly power can't understand. Pilate was a governor with legions under his command, yet he was shaken by a silent man in chains. That tells you something. Silence holds more weight than titles, more strength than armies, more clarity than arguments. Jesus' silence exposed Pilate's own lack of courage. It forced him to make a decision he couldn't justify. That's what silence does. It pushes the other to reveal themselves while you remain whole. In personal conflicts, this principle is gold. When someone lies about you, spreading their version of the story, the natural urge is to defend, to explain, to shout back. But when you don't, when you stay calm and collected, they grow louder. And in growing louder, they grow more obvious. The truth always outlasts the lie, but silence gives it room to breathe. There is another layer. Jesus knew his mission. He knew that every insult, every lash, every silence was part of a greater victory. That's the key. When your silence is rooted in purpose, you're not avoiding the battle, you're winning the war. You let others play their part while you keep your eyes on the throne. There are battles not worth your breath, not because you are weak, but because you are already walking in victory. Speak only when it aligns with your assignment. Otherwise, hold your peace and watch the world tremble. Pilate couldn't understand Jesus' silence because Pilate was stuck in a world where speaking proved power. Jesus, however, lived from a kingdom where silence revealed authority. And that's your invitation, to walk through fire with stillness, to face injustice with unshaken peace, to conquer not by reacting, but by radiating a power that needs no words. Silence is not absence, it's presence purified. So the next time you stand accused, remember the king who said nothing and won everything. The psychology of fear. How your presence wins without noise. Before a word is ever spoken, before an argument is launched or a point defended, something more ancient has already taken place, a silent exchange of presence. Fear, tension, hierarchy, respect, all of it is decided not in the volume of your voice, but in the invisible battlefield of energy. And most people lose before they even open their mouth. Why? Because they walk into the room with the wrong posture, the wrong breath, the wrong spirit. Psychology confirms it. Fear is contagious, but so is confidence. And when you're silent but fully present, you create psychological gravity. People feel you before they hear you. They sense your calm as a challenge to their chaos. They interpret your stillness as strength, because in a world where everyone is constantly trying to prove themselves, the one who doesn't stands out like a king. The great power in not speaking lies in what your presence makes others feel. If your presence triggers insecurity in someone, they'll speak too much. If it triggers curiosity, they'll lean in. If it radiates certainty, they'll retreat or submit. But none of this works if your silence is laced with fear. The goal is not to be quiet out of avoidance, but out of alignment. When you walk into a room with purpose in your spine, stillness in your face, and peace, in your eyes people recognize a force they can't explain. That's when you begin to win, before a word escapes your lips. Freud observed that humans respond more strongly to what is implied than to what is spoken directly. The unknown is always more powerful than the obvious. And so when you refuse to speak, people project onto you. They fill the silence with their own fears, assumptions, and memories. You become a canvas for their insecurities, and in that space, you dominate without moving. This is why some people are hated without ever having done anything. Their mere presence convicts others. It reveals what they are not. It confronts their fragility, not through words, but through comparison. Jung called this the shadow at work. When you meet someone whose being exposes your own undeveloped character, your instincts either admire them or attack them. This is psychological war, and the silent man is often its victor. But your presence must be cultivated. It's not about faking calm, it's about becoming calm. It's about dealing with your inner noise until the outer world can no longer provoke you. Jesus walked among demons and kings, and his presence alone disturbed them, not because he shouted, but because he carried what they lacked: authority. That authority is rooted in identity. When you know who you are, silence is no longer empty. It becomes full of purpose, clarity, and power. You walk differently, you see differently, you listen more and talk less. And in that space of silence, people reveal everything: their motives, their triggers, their lies, their desires. You say nothing and you learn everything. This is not passive behavior, it's strategic command. While others compete for attention, you command it without asking. While others broadcast their opinions, you read the field. Your silence forces others to show their hand while you keep yours hidden. This is how you win. Not with noise, not with dominance, but with undeniable presence. Your stillness creates discomfort in the insecure, safety for the wise, and clarity for yourself. So the next time you feel that need to speak just to be seen, pause. Let your silence speak. Let your presence do the talking. You don't have to prove you're powerful. You only have to walk like someone who no longer needs to. The art of disarming with your eyes. How to become unshakable. There is a type of gaze that unsettles the arrogant, calms the unstable, and silences the loud. It does not shout. It does not plead. It does not seek approval. It simply looks. And in that look, it disarms. Most people never realize that the eyes are a weapon, not in the way of aggression, but in the way of unwavering presence. When you Learn to hold eye contact with calm, grounded stillness. You access a language older than words, a primal signal of inner power. In psychology, the eyes are considered the most honest part of the body. You can fake a smile, but not a gaze. You can rehearse a speech, but not the look behind your eyes. That's where your truth lives. And the person who can look directly, without flinching, without needing to dominate, wins more than arguments. They win presence, trust, and control. The problem is, most people don't know how to look without leaking emotion. Their eyes reveal their desperation, their fear, their need to be right. But when your eyes are steady, anchored in self-knowledge, not pride, you don't just survive conflict, you bend it. In confrontation, silence paired with direct eye contact is more powerful than any defensive word. The person confronting you expects resistance, they're prepared for noise, but they're not prepared for stillness, they're not ready for the weight of a calm, grounded gaze that says, "I see you, but I'm not shaken." That is psychological warfare at its highest level. Even children know this instinctively. A child in trouble will often avoid their parents' gaze, not because of what will be said, but because of what that gaze reveals. It exposes. It holds them accountable. The same principle applies in adult interaction. When you meet someone's eyes without fear, without rush, without agenda, you take space, you don't shrink, you expand. Freud believed that beneath all verbal exchanges lies a deeper current of unconscious communication. The eyes bypass the rational defenses. They reach into the hidden fears, the buried desires, the shame no one talks about. So when you master this tool, you no longer need to explain yourself. Your gaze becomes your posture, your tone, your message. Think of Jesus and Peter. When Peter denied Jesus 3 times, Scripture says Jesus turned and looked at him. He didn't speak. He didn't rebuke. He didn't punish. He looked, and Peter wept bitterly. Why? Because that look held more power than any sentence ever could. It revealed truth. It awakened conscience. It delivered consequence, not through volume, but through connection. That's the level of spiritual and psychological depth you can walk in when you've cultivated your inner world. People often speak loud when they feel small, but when you are full inside, when you are aligned with peace, your silence backed by a gaze becomes a sword too sharp to block. You don't need to prove. You only need to be. This doesn't mean staring others down like a threat. That's just ego in disguise. True power doesn't seek to intimidate. It simply does not flinch. It does not explain. It observes with compassion and unshakable clarity. In conflict, you don't raise your voice. You raise your presence. You disarm with your eyes by showing you are not at war with yourself. And when the storm comes, verbal attacks, false accusations, manipulation, you don't panic. You hold their gaze. You let the silence stretch, and in that stretch they break. Because the one who can hold the moment longer always controls it. So practice stillness, practice presence, but above all, practice the gaze. It is not about being cold, it is about being clear. And when your inner clarity meets their outer chaos, you win without a word. Strategic silence. How to win fights without entering the ring. The most dangerous person in any confrontation is not the one yelling, threatening, or throwing punches. It's the one who never entered the ring in the first place. The one who knows the difference between fighting and winning. And more often than not, the battle is won not by power but by strategy. Silence is not withdrawal. Silence is position. It's psychological jujitsu, using the other person's momentum against them without lifting a finger. In today's world of constant reaction, where people are addicted to responding, defending, clapping back, and proving their point, silence has become a lost art, an ancient code of strength that only the truly grounded understand. Every time you engage in a petty argument, you validate the other person. You say with your energy, "You're worth my time, you're worth my peace." But when you remain silent, detached, and grounded, you send a very different message. You don't have access to me. That's power, that's leverage. You control the terms of engagement by refusing to engage. In Sun Tzu's The Art of War, he writes, "The greatest victory is that which requires no battle." And in your daily life, this principle applies more than ever. Not every comment deserves your attention. Not every challenge is worth answering. Some people feed on conflict because they are starving for control. When you don't give them that, you starve their strategy. You don't win by outshouting a fool, you win by showing them they're not even playing the same game. The quietest person in the room often sees the most, because silence buys time. Time to read body language, time to observe emotional shifts, time to calculate the real motive behind the noise, and most importantly, time to decide whether this battle is even worth your breath. In a society obsessed with instant reaction, strategic silence is rebellion. It says, I don't move on impulse, I choose my battles, and this one, it's beneath me. It's not arrogance, it's awareness. Freud taught that many arguments are not about logic, but about projection. People are fighting with their parents, their past, their own insecurities, and you just happen to be the nearest target. If you understand this, you stop taking it personally. You let the arrow fly past you. You don't even need to dodge. It was never aimed at the real you. Jesus faced countless moments where people tried to trap him with words, Pharisees throwing verbal traps, critics trying to provoke a reaction. But he chose when to speak and when not to. That choice was power, that restraint was wisdom. It's not that he couldn't destroy them with a word, it's that he didn't need to, and neither do you. The ego wants to win arguments. The spirit wants to win peace, and peace is always stronger than victory, because it lasts. Strategic. Silence also creates curiosity. When you don't react, people begin to wonder. They project, they analyze, they overthink. Your silence becomes a space they cannot fill, and that space is where your power lives. It's psychological asymmetry. They came to fight. You came to observe. They came to explode. You came to expand. And in doing nothing, you dominate everything. Remember this. A man who has mastered silence is a man who cannot be manipulated. He doesn't rush to fix. He doesn't beg to be understood. He doesn't fear being misjudged. He holds the line and lets the rest collapse on its own. So the next time you're tempted to argue, pause. Ask yourself, is this worth my energy? Or is this a trap to pull me out of alignment? And if the answer is no, smile, breathe, stay still. Because sometimes the strongest blow you can deliver is none at all. When you stop talking, the world starts listening. Mastery without permission. There comes a moment in every powerful person's journey when they stop trying to be heard, and that's exactly when everyone leans in. Because silence, when paired with presence, becomes undeniable. It's not the silence of avoidance, it's not shyness or fear. It's the silence of a man who knows he has nothing left to prove. And when you arrive at that level, the world listens. Not because you demanded it, but because your very existence demands it. When you speak less, your words carry more weight. And when you stop explaining yourself, people begin to wonder what you're holding. That wonder becomes gravity. It draws attention, respect, and sometimes even reverence. But this kind of presence is not created overnight. It is the result of years of observing instead of reacting, listening instead of performing, and choosing depth over noise. We live in a time where people fight to be seen, to be validated, to be recognized. But the man who doesn't fight for attention gets it, because he's different. While others broadcast their lives like a desperate commercial, he becomes the mystery. And in a world starved for authenticity, mystery is priceless. Strategic silence is not the absence of personality. It's the refusal to waste energy on people who haven't earned your voice. It's a conscious decision to let your actions, your results, your demeanor speak on your behalf. Proverbs 18:2 says, "Fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions." That's the world today. People intoxicated with their own voice. But when you rise above that frequency, you start accessing a deeper level of influence. Freud noted that the deepest truths are not shouted, they are experienced. The unconscious listens more to presence than to content. And so the man who says little but carries himself with integrity, with clarity, with discipline, becomes a symbol. He doesn't speak often, but when he does, it shakes the room. This is the kind of power that does not ask for permission. It doesn't need a stage. It creates one. Look at the greatest leaders in history. They were never the loudest. They were the most anchored. Jesus didn't run a political campaign. He walked slowly through villages, healing, teaching, listening. His words mattered because his silences did. His presence was his message. And you, no matter your platform, your past, your personality, can walk in that same authority. When you quiet the noise in your mind, you start hearing what really matters. When you stop reacting to every insult, every rumor, every demand for attention, you begin to cultivate mastery. People will test your silence. They'll call it weakness. They'll poke at it. They'll try to provoke a response just to feel powerful. But your job is not to entertain their insecurity. Your job is to remain centered, still immovable, because the moment you break your silence to prove your strength, you've already lost some of it. The wise man doesn't chase moments. He lets them come to him. He doesn't chase applause. He lets it echo after he's gone. And most of all, he doesn't chase influence. He becomes influence. So from now on, speak only when your words are heavier than your silence. Hold the pause. Own the room. Let others perform, explain, cry out. You observe. You discern. You choose. That's not just confidence, that's mastery. And it doesn't need a microphone, it already has your presence.